The red dust of the Arizona Territory did not just sit on the skin, it bit into it. It found its way into the creases of clothes, the water barrels, and the very souls of the people trying to scratch a living from the hard earth. It was the year 1880, and the border between Arizona and New Mexico was a wound that refused to close. To the east, the railroad tracks were cutting through the land like a surgical scar, bringing iron, steam, and men who smelled of coal and greed. To the west lay the deep, twisting canyons of the Navajo lands, a place of shadows and ancient silence that the white men in San Miguel looked at with a mixture of hunger and fear. Elena Hart stood on the porch of her homestead, the wood groaning softly under her boots. She held a piece of paper in her hand, the edges curling in the dry heat. It was a letter from the bank in Santa Fe. The sum written there was $500. It might as well have been $1 million. To a widow with a failing herd and a mortgage that cast a shadow longer than the afternoon sun. $500 was a death sentence. She looked out over the scrubland. 2 weeks ago, William had been standing right here. He had been smiling, confident that the delivery of gold to the bank would clear their slate. He had kissed her on the forehead, the smell of tobacco and bay rum lingering on his shirt. Now, William was 6 feet under the rocky soil behind the barn. Elena was left with a Winchester rifle, a debt she could not pay, and a rage that burned hotter than the midday sun. The official report said it was a Navajo raiding party. Everyone in San Miguel said it was the Savages. Major Silas Monroe from the nearby Army outpost had stood over William's coffin and practically shouted that it was time to civilize the territory once and for all. But Elena remembered the dust and the blood, and she remembered the sound. She closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her, painful as it was. She was not on the wagon when it happened, but she had ridden out when the horse came back riderless. She had found the wreck. She had seen the arrows sticking out of the wood. But she had also found a man, one of the drivers, dying in the dirt. He had gripped her wrist, his eyes wide with a confusion that death was rapidly stealing away. "They wore the paint," the dying man had rasped. "Feathers, but they spoke English. One of them. He cursed like a man from Boston." That whisper haunted her. It did not fit. Elena knew the Navajo. Her stepmother, the woman who had raised her after her own mother died of fever, had been a woman of the Dine people. She had taught Elena the rhythm of the language, the way the words felt like water rolling over stones. She knew that a Navajo raiding party would not be cursing in the slang of the East Coast slums. But in San Miguel, truth was a luxury no one could afford. Elena folded the bank notice and shoved it into her apron pocket. She checked the load in her revolver, a heavy Colt Peacemaker that felt too big for her hand but necessary for her survival. She had to go into town. Major Monroe had summoned her, and when the army called, you did not refuse, especially not when you were a woman alone on the edge of the world. High up on the ridge overlooking the valley, Kainez watched the solitary figure of the woman mount her horse. He lay flat on his stomach, his body blending perfectly with the sandstone and scrub brush. He was a man of the canyon, a warrior who had once worn the blue coat of an army scout because he believed it would help his people navigate the changing tide. He had believed that if he showed the white soldiers the paths, they would respect the boundaries. He had been wrong. He had seen too many broken treaties, too many empty promises, and too much cruelty disguised as progress. He had handed back his coat and his rifle 2 years ago, choosing to walk the old paths again. But now, the paths were running with blood that did not belong there. Kai adjusted his position, his dark eyes narrowing as he watched Elena ride toward San Miguel. He knew who she was. He knew her husband was dead. He also knew that the men who killed him were not of his blood. He had tracked the attackers after the ambush. He had seen their boot prints heavy, hobnailed boots, not the moccasins of a war party. He had found a discarded cigar butt of a brand that cost 10 cents apiece in the general store. His people were being framed. It was a clumsy frame, painted with broad strokes for eyes that wanted to see only what they hated. But it was effective. The anger in San Miguel was boiling over, and Kai knew that soon. That anger would turn into a marching column of blue coats heading straight for the heart of Navajo land. He had to stop it. And the woman riding the bay horse was the key. She had seen the aftermath. She was the widow. If she spoke the truth, maybe the army would pause. If she lied like the rest of them, his people were doomed. Kai slid back from the edge of the cliff, moving with the silence of a cloud shadow passing over rock. He would meet her. He would look her in the eye, and he would see if she had the courage of the woman who had raised her. The town of San Miguel was a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support against the wind. The air smelled of horse manure, stale beer, and the coal smoke from the train station at the far end of the main street. Elena tied her horse outside the sheriff's office. Where the meeting was to be held, the boardwalk was crowded. Men stopped their conversations to watch her pass. Some tipped their hats in sympathy. Others just stared with that hungry, predatory look that men get when they see a woman without a protector. Inside the office, the air was stifling. Major Silas Monroe sat behind the desk, his uniform immaculate despite the heat. He was a man who wore his authority like a second skin, thick and unyielding. Beside him stood Everett Sloan, the representative from the railroad company. Sloan was a contrast to the major. He wore a suit of fine gray wool that must have been torture in this weather, and his hands were soft, the hands of a man who signed papers rather than dug holes. "Mrs. Hart," Monroe said, standing up. He had a voice that carried, a voice made for shouting orders over the roar of cannons. "Thank you for coming. I know this is a difficult time. I am here because you sent a soldier to my porch. Major," Elena said, keeping her voice steady. She refused to play the weeping willow. "What do you want?" Sloan stepped forward, a smile slick as oil on his face. "We want justice for your husband, my dear, and safety for this territory." "The attacks are increasing," Monroe said, pointing to a map on the wall. Pins stuck out of it like angry red sores. 3 wagons this month. 2 settlers were killed near the river, and now you're William. The Navajo have broken the peace. They are rogue, dangerous, and they need to be put down. Elena looked at the map. "You are sure it was them?" "Who else?" Monroe scoffed. "We found arrows. We found feathers. It is an open and shut case. Mrs. Hart." "My husband's driver," Elena said slowly. "Before he died, he said they spoke English. Good English." Sloan's smile did not waver, but his eyes went cold for a fraction of a second. "Renegades often pick up the language. Mrs. Hart, they use it to mock their victims. It proves their savagery, does it not?" "We are preparing a campaign," Monroe interrupted, leaning forward. "A sweep of the canyons to drive the hostiles back to the reservation where they belong. But the terrain is difficult. We need someone who knows the old trails, someone who can guide a column through the labyrinth without getting us ambushed." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "You want a scout? You have scouts." "Not one we can trust," Monroe said. "The Indian scouts are sympathetic to their own. We need a white guide. Your father. He mapped those canyons years ago. Did he not before he passed?" "He did," Elena said. Her father had been a surveyor, a man who loved the land more than he loved people. He had left her his journals and his maps. "And you rode with him," Sloan added. "You know the way to the hidden springs. You know the box canyons. I have not ridden those trails in 5 years," Elena said. "But you have the maps," Sloan said softly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And you have a debt, Mrs. Hart, $500 to the Santa Fe Bank. That is a heavy burden for a grieving widow." Elena stiffened. "How do you know about my finances?" "The railroad makes it its business to know the stability of its neighbors," Sloan said. "Here is the offer. You guide Major Monroe's column through the canyons. You help us root out these murderers. In exchange, the railroad will purchase your cattle at double the market price. Your debt will be wiped clean. You save your ranch. You avenge your husband." It was a trap. Elena felt it in her gut. It was too neat, too convenient. But the alternative was losing everything. The ranch was all she had left of her father, all she had left of William. I need time to think," Elena said. "We march in 3 days." Monroe said, his voice hard again. Do not take too long. Mrs. Hart, justice does not wait. Elena left the office, her head spinning. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the street. She needed to breathe. She untied her horse and walked him toward the edge of town, where the creek ran shallow over a bed of red rocks. It was a quiet spot, away from the prying eyes of the saloon and the hotel. She knelt by the water, splashing her face. The coldness shocked her senses back to the present. Was she really considering leading soldiers into the canyons? Her stepmother's voice whispered in her memory, telling her stories of the holy people, of the spirits that lived in the wind and the stone. To lead an army there felt like a betrayal. But William was dead, and if the Navajo killed him... A twig snapped. Elena spun around, her hand flying to the holster at her hip. She drew the Colt with a speed born of fear and practice, leveling it at the shadow standing by the cottonwood tree. "Step out," she ordered. Her thumb pulled back the hammer. Click. A figure emerged from the gloom. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing buckskin trousers and a faded calico shirt. His hair was long, tied back with a strip of leather, and around his neck hung a silver amulet set with turquoise. A Navajo. "Here, in town." "Don't shoot," the man said. His voice was deep, calm, and utterly lacking in fear. He held his hands away from his body, showing he was not reaching for the knife at his belt or the rifle slung over his shoulder. "Give me one reason why I should not drop you right here," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "After what your people did to my husband." The man looked at her. His face was like the landscape itself, hard, weathered, and beautiful in a severe way. "If I wanted you dead, Elena Hart, you would have died in the canyon 2 weeks ago, when you were kneeling in the dirt beside the wagon, crying." Elena's breath hitched. She lowered the gun an inch. "You were there." "I was watching," Kai said. "I saw the wagon. I saw the men who did it right away." "Then you admit it," Elena hissed. "You admit you watched them kill him." "I watched men kill him," Kai corrected. "But they were not my people. They wore the paint. Paint can be bought," Kai said. He moved a step closer, ignoring the barrel of the gun pointing at his chest. "Listen to me. The men who killed your husband rode shod horses, iron shoes. My people ride unshod ponies in the raid, for silence. And one of them, the one with the scar on his chin." He dropped something. Elena stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "The gray horse," Kai said. "The one your husband was driving. It had a stone in its shoe. Your husband climbed down to check the hoof. That was when the first shot hit him. In the back." The gun in Elena's hand wavered. She had never told anyone that detail. She had found William's body near the front of the team, the hoof of the gray horse still lifted on his knee, the pick in his dead hand. The official report said he died fighting, but Elena knew he had been murdered while trying to help a lame animal. "How?" Elena whispered. "How do you know that?" "Because I was there," Kai said. "I was tracking them, but I was too late to stop the first volley, and there were too many of them for one man to fight." "Why didn't you shoot them?" Elena asked, tears stinging her eyes. "I did," Kai said. "I put an arrow in the shoulder of the leader, the man with the Boston voice. Ask your Major Monroe if any of his citizens have come to the doctor recently with a shoulder wound." Elena lowered the gun completely. The world was tilting on its axis. "Who are you?" "My name is Kai Nez," he said. "And I'm telling you that you are being used. The railroad wants the land. The army wants a war. And they are using your grief to light the fuse." "They want me to guide them," Elena confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "They want me to lead them into the canyon." Kai's face hardened. "If you do that, it will be a slaughter. Not of warriors, but of families, women, children. They are hiding in the Spider Rock Canyon. They are starving. Elena Hart, they are not raiding wagons for gold. They are eating roots to survive. If I don't do it, I lose everything," Elena said. "They will take my home." "If you do it," Kai said, his voice low and intense, You will lose your soul, and you will never wash the blood from your hands." He looked toward the town, where the lights of the saloon were starting to flicker on. "Sloan and Monroe are planning a war. I'm going to stop them. I need to find proof that the attacks are staged, but I cannot walk into that town. They would hang me before I opened my mouth." He turned his gaze back to her. "I need your help. You can go where I cannot." Elena took a step back. This was insanity. He was a stranger, a savage, according to everyone she knew. And yet, he knew about the stone in the horse's shoe. He spoke with a quiet dignity that Monroe and Sloan lacked. I can't," Elena said. "I can't trust you." "Then trust your eyes." Kai said, "Go to the stable behind the saloon. Look at the horses the deputies ride. Look for a sorrel mare with a white stocking on the left foreleg. Look at the saddlebag. You will find a feather, a hawk feather, dyed red. Not a Navajo pattern, a fake, made to be left at a crime scene." He began to back away into the darkness. "Wait," Elena called out. "3 days," Kai said, his voice fading as he merged with the shadows. "You have 3 days before the soldiers march. Make your choice. Elena Hart." And then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with the rushing water and the terrible weight of a truth she did not want to believe. Elena did not sleep that night. She sat in a rocking chair by the window, the Colt in her lap, watching the road. The moon painted the desert in shades of silver and bone. Kai's words circled in her mind like vultures. Iron shoes, Boston voice, a stone in the hoof. The next morning, she rode back into town. She did not go to the Major. She went to the livery stable behind the Golden Nugget Saloon. It was where the hired guns and the drifters kept their mounts. The stable boy was asleep on a pile of hay. Elena moved quietly down the row of stalls. The air was thick with the smell of wet straw and horse sweat. She looked at the horses, a bay, a roan, a mule. And then she saw it. A sorrel mare with a white stocking on the left foreleg. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around. The stable was empty. She unbuckled the leather flap of the saddlebag hanging on the stall door. Her fingers trembled as she reached inside. She felt a tin of tobacco, a box of cartridges, and something soft. She pulled it out. It was a hawk feather. The quill was wrapped in raw leather, and the tip was dipped in red paint. But the wrapping was clumsy. It was a knot any white sailor would tie, not the intricate binding of a Navajo Fletcher. Kai had told the truth. Elena shoved the feather back into the bag and backed away. She felt sick. The men drinking in the saloon. The men Monroe called a citizens' militia. They were the ones. They had killed William. They had killed him to start a war, to clear the land for Sloan's railroad. And she was supposed to lead them to the victims. She walked out into the blinding sunlight. Major Monroe was standing across the street, talking to the doctor. He saw her and waved, a gesture of ownership. "Mrs. Hart," he called out. "Have you made your decision?" Elena looked at him. She looked at the polished buttons of his uniform, shining like gold coins. She thought of her farm, her father's legacy. Then she thought of the dying man's whisper, Boston voice. She forced a smile onto her face. It felt fragile, like dried clay. "I have, Major," she called back. Monroe walked over, looking pleased. "Excellent. I knew you were a patriot. We will make sure you are compensated, of course." "I will guide you," Elena said, her voice steady now, hardened by a new resolve. "But I need time to prepare. I need to study my father's maps. I will be ready in 2 days." 2 days, Monroe agreed. "We will be ready." Elena mounted her horse. As she turned the animal toward her ranch, she looked up at the ridge where she had seen the flash of a mirror earlier that morning. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She was going to lead them. Yes, but she was not going to lead them to a massacre. She was going to lead them into a trap of her own making. If she could figure out how, she had to find Kynez again. She had to tell him that he was right. And for the first time since William died, Elena Hart did not feel like a widow drowning in grief. She felt like a woman holding a weapon. The dust swirled around her as she rode out of San Miguel. But the wind whispered a new promise. It was not just dust and blood anymore. Now, there was a plan. And somewhere in the red rocks, a warrior was waiting. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky into a bruise of purple and black, Kai sat by a small fire in a hidden alcove of the canyon wall. He sharpened his knife, the rhythmic shh of the stone against steel, the only sound in the vast emptiness. He had seen Elena go into the stable. He had seen her come out with a face pale as milk, but eyes hard as flint. She believed him, but believing was the easy part. Surviving what came next would be the test. Sloan and Monroe were not just men. They were the spearheads of a machine that wanted to devour the world. They had money, they had laws written in their favor, and they had bullets, lots of bullets. Kai looked at the fire. He was one man. She was one woman, against an army and a railroad. "Let them come," he whispered to the flames. He stood up and kicked dirt over the fire, extinguishing the light. Darkness was his friend. The white men feared the night, feared the silence. Kai Nez lived in it. He mounted his horse, an Appaloosa that moved as sure-footed as a mountain goat. He had to meet Elena halfway. They had to talk. They had to forge an alliance written in blood, because that was the only ink the West understood. He rode toward the ranch, under the cover of the stars. The first move had been made. The game had begun. And the winner would take it all: the land, the truth, and the lives of everyone caught in the middle. As he rode, he thought of the torn dress he had seen in his vision, a vision sent by the spirits days ago. He had seen Elena falling, her dress ripping, blood on her skin. He had seen himself kneeling beside her. He had not understood it then. Now, he feared he knew exactly what it meant. Pain was coming, but so was the truth. Kai urged his horse into a gallop. The desert wind rushed past his ears, sounding like 1,000 whispers screaming for justice. The wooden clock on the mantel ticked with the slow, agonizing rhythm of a death march. Inside the small parlor of the Hart Ranch house, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and impending ruin. Elena sat opposite the bank manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who sweated profusely despite the coolness of the adobe walls. Beside him stood Everett Sloan, looking as comfortable as a rattlesnake on a sun-warmed rock, and Major Monroe, who paced the floorboards like a caged tiger. 30 days. Mrs. Hart. Mr. Henderson said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. The board in Santa Fe has been clear, without a payment of $200 toward the interest, and a plan for the remaining principal. We have no choice but to initiate foreclosure proceedings. Elena gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles turned white. $200. You might as well ask me for the moon. You know the herd is thin this year. You know William is gone. Which is why we are here to offer a solution, Sloan interjected smoothly. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the back of Elena's chair. It took every ounce of her self-control not to flinch away. The railroad needs beef to feed the crews pushing west. I'm authorized to purchase your entire stock, at 3 times the current market rate. Elena looked up at him. And the catch? No catch, Sloan said, his smile tight. Just a condition. We need the land secure before we lay the track. Major Monroe needs to clear the canyons. We need you to guide him. It is a matter of duty. Elena, Monroe boomed, stopping his pacing to loom over her. Those savages killed your husband. They are threatening the progress of this entire territory. Do you want William's death to go unanswered? Do you want to lose the home he built for you because you are too afraid to do what is necessary? The manipulation was blunt, heavy-handed, and effective. They had cornered her. On one side, the loss of her home and her father's legacy. On the other, a chance to save it all, wrapped in the flag of vengeance. If I do this, Elena said, her voice low, if I take you to the winding trails, you promise me the debt is cleared in writing. You have my word, Sloan said, and the contract is already drafted. And my safety. You will be riding with 50 of the United States Cavalry's finest, Monroe assured her, puffing out his chest. And a dozen of Mr. Sloan's private security detail to watch the rear. You will be the safest woman in Arizona." Elena looked at the empty fireplace. She thought of the stone in the horse's shoe. She thought of the hawk feather tied with a sailor's knot. But then she looked at the bank notice on the table. "Fine," she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "I will do it." Miles away, in the deep shadows of a sandstone overhang, Kai Nez sat with his back against the rock. He was listening to the report of a young runner from his clan. The boy, hardly 16, was breathless and covered in dust. "They are gathering at the edge of town," the boy said in Navajo. "Blue coats, and the men with the long guns who do not wear uniforms. They have wagons filled with supplies." Kai nodded slowly. It was as he suspected. This was not a patrol. It was an invasion. "And they are saying the raid on the Mexican traders yesterday was us," the boy added, anger flaring in his eyes. "They say we butchered them and left them for the buzzards near the Twin Mesas." Kai's jaw tightened. He knew about the traders. He had found the tracks leading away from that slaughter. They were the same heavy boot prints he'd seen at the ambush of Elena's husband. It was a pattern. Strike a target, leave false tokens, and let the white man's fear do the rest. Sloan did not just want the land for the railroad. He wanted a war to drive the price of the land down so he could buy it for pennies, then sell it to the government at a premium once the track was laid. It was a game of blood and money. "They move at dawn," Kai said. "They will head for the Spider Rock Canyon. It is the only route large enough for their wagons." "We should fight them at the entrance," the boy said, clutching his rifle. "No," Kai commanded. "If we attack the army, we give them exactly the war they want. We must expose the lie, and to do that, I need the woman." He stood up, checking the cinch on his saddle. He had to try one last time. He had to stop Elena Hart from leading the wolves to the sheepfold. The San Miguel River was little more than a trickle of muddy water winding through the cottonwoods. But at night, it provided a cool respite from the desert heat. Elena had told Monroe she needed to check the shoals before the crossing tomorrow. It was a lie. She needed to be away from the suffocating air of the town. She knelt by the water, filling her canteen. The moonlight fractured on the rippling surface. "You agreed to lead them." The voice came from the darkness of the trees. Elena did not jump this time. She stood slowly, her hand resting on the butt of her Colt. Kai stepped into the moonlight. He looked tired, the dust of the high country coating his clothes, but his eyes were sharp. "I had no choice," Elena said defensively. "They were going to take my land. So you trade your land for the lives of my people?" Kai asked. His voice was not angry, which made it worse. "I was disappointed." "And for your own life. Monroe swore to protect me," she said. Kai let out a short, bitter laugh. "Monroe cannot protect you from the men he is riding with. Do you think Sloan intends to leave witnesses once you guide them through the treacherous parts? Once you are deep in the Badlands where an accident is easy to arrange? Do you think you will drive back to your ranch?" Elena felt a cold knot in her stomach. She had pushed that thought away, buried it under desperation. "I can take care of myself," she said. "I have my father's map. They need me." "They need a scapegoat," Kai countered. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small, metallic object. He tossed it through the air. Elena caught it. It was cold and heavy. She held it up to the moonlight. It was a brass badge, tarnished and dented. On it were stamped the letters SPR, Security. "Southern Pacific Railroad," Kai said. "I found it in the brush, 50 yards from where your husband's wagon was attacked. The leather strap was cut. It fell off one of the attackers." Elena ran her thumb over the raised letters. A railroad badge. At the scene of a Navajo raid? "Navajo do not work for the railroad," Kai said softly, "and we do not wear brass badges." "Why give this to me?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Why not take it to the sheriff?" "Because the sheriff drinks Sloan's whiskey," Kai said, "and because you are the only one who can stop this column from within. You know the terrain. You can slow them down. You can lead them away from the families hiding in the caves." "If I do that, they will know," Elena said. "Monroe is not a fool. He is a fool with a sword," Kai said. But Sloan is the snake. Listen to me. Elena, do not enter the deep canyon. If you cross the shadow line of the second mesa, there is no turning back. My warriors will be watching. I will be watching. Are you threatening me? Elena asked, gripping the badge tight enough to cut her palm. I am warning you. Kai said, if you lead them to my people, I will fight. I will kill soldiers. I will kill Sloan's men. And if you are standing between me and the safety of the children, I do not know what I will do. He looked at her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. Turn back, he whispered, before the blood is on your hands forever. He melted back into the trees before she could answer. Elena stood alone by the river, the brass badge burning a hole in her hand. She slipped it into her pocket, next to the bank notice, 2 pieces of paper, 2 pieces of metal, pulling her in opposite directions. She would go. She had to save the ranch. But she made a vow to the empty night she would watch. She would listen. And if she saw undeniable proof that Kai was right, she would burn Sloan's plan to the ground, even if she had to burn with it. The sun rose like a bloodshot eye over San Miguel. The column formed up on the main road, a snake of blue and dust. Major Monroe rode at the front on a large black stallion, looking every inch the conqueror. Behind him rode 50 troopers, their sabers rattling. Flanking the wagons were Sloan's men, a dozen rough-looking characters in dusters, cradling Winchester repeating rifles. They did not look like security guards. They looked like executioners. Elena rode near the front, her father's map case slung over her shoulder. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a sturdy riding skirt, her Colt strapped to her hip. She felt the eyes of the town on her. Some cheered, some looked away. Ready to make history, Mrs. Hart? Sloan asked, riding up beside her on a sleek gelding. I am ready to get this over with, Elena replied curtly. Forward! Ho! Monroe shouted, and the column lurched into motion. They rode east, leaving the safety of the town behind. The land quickly turned harsh. The scrub brush gave way to cactus and towering rock formations that twisted toward the sky. The heat rose in shimmering waves off the hard pan. Elena kept her eyes moving. She watched the horizon. She watched the troopers. But mostly, she watched Sloan's men. They rode with a casual arrogance, talking in low voices, ignoring military discipline. By midday, they reached the site of the reported attack on the Mexican traders. Monroe raised his hand to halt the column. Behold, Monroe declared, gesturing grandly, the work of the savages. It was a grim sight. A small campsite had been burned. A wagon was a charred skeleton. 3 bodies lay in the dirt, buzzing with flies. Elena forced herself to look. She dismounted and walked closer, ignoring Monroe's warning to stay back. The dead men were Mexicanos, simple traders by the look of their clothes. See, Sloan said, coming up behind her. He pointed to the wrist of the nearest body. Navajo silver. Indeed, a heavy silver bracelet set with turquoise was on the man's wrist, but Elena frowned. The bracelet was loose. It would have fallen off if the man had been working or fighting. It looked placed. She knelt down, pretending to pray, but her eyes were scanning the ground. The dirt around the bodies was churned up. She saw the prints of unshod ponies, the sign of the Navajo, but underneath the disturbance, half hidden by a trampled bush, she saw something else. A boot print, a distinct heel mark with a V shape cut into it. She stood up and walked back to the horses. As she passed Sloan's men, she glanced at their stirrups. The man closest to her, a bearded giant with a scar across his nose, was resting his foot in the stirrup. He wore cavalry boots, and on the heel, caked in dried mud. She could just make out a V-shaped notch. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. The badge, the stone in the hoof, the fake feather. And now this. We must press on, Monroe shouted. We cannot let the trail go cold. Mrs. Hart, lead us to the entrance of the canyon. Elena mounted her horse. Her hands were shaking, but she gripped the reins tight to hide it. It was a play. A deadly, gruesome play staged for an audience of 1, the government officials who would read Monroe's report and authorize the railroad expansion. Kai was out there, watching. She could feel his gaze on the back of her neck. They pushed deeper into the Badlands. The walls of the canyon began to rise around them, turning the sky into a narrow ribbon of blue. The shadows lengthened. This was the throat of the beast. As the sun began to dip, casting the canyon floor into twilight, Elena pulled her horse up. "Major," she said, "we should camp here. The trail ahead narrows. It is dangerous to navigate in the dark." "Nonsense," Monroe said, eager for glory. "There is a full moon tonight. We can make another 5 miles. We need to catch them sleeping." "The terrain ahead is a box canyon," Elena lied. She knew it opened up, but she needed to stall. "If we go in now, we have no high ground." "Mrs. Hart is right," Sloane said unexpectedly. "My men are tired. And we want to be fresh for the encounter. We camp." Elena looked at Sloane. He was smiling, but it was the smile of a wolf waiting for the trap to spring. He did not want to camp because he was tired. He wanted to camp because this location suited him. As the soldiers began to set up tents, and Sloane's men took up positions on the perimeter positions that seemed designed to keep people in rather than keep enemies out, Elena realized the terrifying truth. They were not hunting Navajo. They were waiting for the Navajo to come to them, or perhaps they were waiting for the right moment to eliminate the only witness who wasn't on the payroll. High above on the canyon rim, Kai lay flat against the stone. He lowered his spyglass. "They are stopping," his companion whispered. "Yes," Kai said. "In the killing jar." He knew this spot. It was a natural amphitheater with steep walls on 3 sides. If Sloane's mercenaries positioned themselves on the ridges above during the night, they could fire down into the camp. They could kill the soldiers, kill Elena, and claim the Navajo had ambushed them from the heights. It would be a massacre of American troops. The perfect excuse for a total war of extermination. Sloane was sacrificing Monroe and his own countrymen to get his railroad. "We have to attack the mercenaries before they get to the ridge," the young warrior said. "No," Kai said. "If we shoot first, we prove Monroe right. We look like the aggressors." He looked down at the small figure of Elena, standing near the firelight, looking small and alone among the wolves. "I have to get her out," Kai said. "Tonight, before the shooting starts. It is suicide. Kai, you cannot go down there. If she stays, she dies," Kai said simply. "And she is the only one who knows the truth about the badge. She is the only one who can testify." He pushed himself up, checking his knife and his revolver. "Stay here. Watch the mercenaries. If they start to climb the walls, signal me with the owl call. But do not engage unless I give the order." Kai slipped over the edge of the rim, finding toeholds in the sheer rock face that no white man would see. He descended into the darkness of the canyon floor, moving toward the enemy camp. He had told her he would fight if she led them here, but as he watched her silhouette against the fire, he knew he had lied. He could not fight her. He had to save her, even if it meant walking straight into the fire. The inciting choice had been made. The die was cast. Now, the bargain written in blood would have to be paid in full. The deeper the column rode into the canyon, the more the silence seemed to press against Elena's eardrums. It was not the peaceful silence of the high desert at night. It was the held breath of a predator before the strike. The walls of the Spider Rock Canyon rose 500 feet on either side, blotting out the late afternoon sun and casting the trail in premature twilight. Major Monroe rode with his back stiff, his eyes scanning the rim. "Keep your spacing," he shouted to the troopers. "Eyes up." Eliana shifted in her saddle. Her horse, a skittish mare named Bess, tossed her head and danced sideways. The animal smelled something that the men could not. Elena smelled it too, the scent of ozone and gun oil. She looked back at Sloane's men. They had fallen behind the main column, lagging by 50 yards. They were not watching the cliffs. They were watching the soldiers. "Major," Elena said, her voice tight. "This is the choke point. The trail narrows to single file around the next bend. If we are going to turn back, we must do it now. We do not turn back. Mrs. Hart," Monroe sneered, pulling his saber half an inch from its scabbard. "We flush them out." He raised his hand to signal the advance. That was when the world exploded. It did not begin with a war cry or the whistle of an arrow. It began with the thunderous crack of high-caliber repeating rifles. The sound slammed into the canyon walls and echoed back with the force of a physical blow. But the shots did not come from the high rim where a Navajo war party would position themselves. They came from the lower ridges, and they came from behind. "Ambush!" a sergeant screamed as his horse collapsed beneath him, shot through the neck. Elena fought to control Bess as the mare reared, screaming in terror. Dust and rock chips sprayed the air as bullets chewed up the ground. Amidst the deafening roar, Elena heard a voice bellowing from the rocks to her left. "Pour it on them! Boys, leave no blue coat standing." It was English, rough, guttural, and undeniably American. "They are speaking English!" Elena shouted at Monroe. But the major was not listening. He was firing his revolver wildly at the empty cliffs, his face purple with rage and panic. "Navajo!" Monroe roared. "They are upon us! Form a perimeter!" It was a lie, a deadly farce played out with lead and blood. The soldiers were spinning in circles, firing at shadows, while the disciplined fire from the lower ridges from Sloan's mercenaries positioned earlier cut them down. A bullet struck the pommel of Elena's saddle, sending a shower of wood splinters into her face. Bess panicked completely. The mare bucked hard, twisting her body in a violent arc. Elena lost her stirrup. She felt the terrifying weightlessness of being thrown, the sky and the red rocks spinning in a kaleidoscope of disaster. She hit the ground hard, rolling down the steep embankment that lined the trail. The shale was sharp as glass. It tore at her clothes and her skin. She felt her riding skirt snag on a jagged root of mesquite, the heavy fabric ripping with a loud tear that sounded like a scream. She tumbled further, her body slamming against a boulder before coming to a rest in a tangle of dry brush. For a moment, there was only blackness and the ringing in her ears. Then, the pain rushed in a sharp, burning agony in her hip and the dull throb of a bruised head. Elena gasped, trying to sit up. Her vision swam. She looked down. Her skirt was torn almost to the waist, exposing the white skin of her thigh and hip, now streaked with dirt and blood. She tried to crawl, to find cover, but her legs refused to obey. Above her, on the trail, the slaughter continued. She could hear the screams of dying horses and the shouts of men. "Check the rise," someone yelled. "Make sure the woman is dead." Elena froze. They were coming for her. She fumbled for her Colt, but her holster was empty. The gun had fallen during the tumble. She was unarmed, injured, and alone in the killing field. Then a shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting to see the bearded face of the mercenary with the notched boot. Instead, she saw a figure drop from the ledge above her with the silent grace of a mountain lion. He landed in a crouch, knife in hand. It was Kainez. He did not speak. He did not waste a second. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron. "Move," he hissed. I can't," Elena stammered, pain flaring in her hip. Kai did not argue. He swept her up, throwing her over his shoulder as if she weighed no more than a sack of grain. He moved with terrifying speed, darting through the maze of boulders, away from the trail and deeper into the shadows of the canyon floor. Elena bounced against his back, every step sending a jolt of agony through her injury. She saw the flashes of gunfire fading behind them. He was taking her into the dark, into the earth. He slid down a narrow fissure in the rock face, ducking into a small, concealed cave mouth hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp earth and bat guano. Kai dropped her onto the sandy floor of the cave, not gently, but with the urgency of a man escaping a fire. Elena scrambled backward, her back hitting the cold stone wall. She was gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The dim light from the entrance filtered in, illuminating Kai as he stood over her. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools in the gloom. Elena looked down at herself. The tear in her dress had worsened during the escape. The fabric had peeled back, leaving her exposed from her hip down to her knee. Blood was welling up from a gash on her thigh. running in dark rivulets down her pale skin. Shame and terror washed over her. She was a white woman, the widow of a man allegedly killed by Navajo. She was alone in a cave with a Navajo warrior who had just dragged her into the darkness. She had heard the stories. Major Monroe told stories of what the savages did to white women before they killed them. Kai took a step toward her. He reached for the knife at his belt. Elena squeezed her eyes shut. She could not fight him. She could not run. The pain in her leg was blinding. "If you have to do it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If you have to, then end it. End it quickly." She waited for the blow. She waited for the pain of the knife or the brutality of his hands. Silence. She opened her eyes. Kai was frozen. He was not looking at her with lust or hatred. He was kneeling, his knife sheathed, his hands hovering uncertainly in the air between them. His expression was one of shock, mingled with a deep, wounded offense. "I am not the monster they told you stories about. Elena Hart," he said, his voice low and vibrating with intensity. "I do not kill women, and I do not take what is not given." He reached out, not to grab her, but to gently pull the torn fabric of her dress further aside. Elena flinched, trying to cover herself, but Kai shook his head. "Be still. You are bleeding. I need to see if the bone is broken or if the bullet grazed you." He was not looking at her nakedness. He was looking at the wound. His fingers, calloused and rough, touched the skin around the gash with surprising tenderness. He pressed around the injury, checking the muscle. "It is a jagged cut from the rock," he pronounced, his tone clinical. "Deep, but it missed the artery. You will walk, but it will leave a scar." He reached for his canteen to wash the wound, but then his hand stopped. He was staring at her hip, not at the wound, but just above it, where the skin was unbroken. Elena looked down. There, stark against her pale skin, was a birthmark she had carried since she was a baby. It was a dark, reddish-brown mark shaped like a perfect spiral, curling inward like a storm cloud or a whirlwind. Kai's finger traced the air above the mark, not touching it, as if it were something holy. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The authority in his voice was gone, replaced by a quiet awe. "It is a birthmark," Elena said, her voice trembling as the adrenaline began to fade, leaving her cold. "I have always had it. My stepmother. She used to kiss it. She said it was a kiss from the wind." Kai sat back on his heels, creating distance between them. He looked at her face, really looked at her, searching for something he had missed before. "That is not just a mark," Kai said. "That is the Nilchai, the wind spirit spiral. It is the mark of the clans who dwell in the high mesas. It is said that children born with this mark are destined to walk between the earth and the sky." Elena pulled the tattered remains of her dress over her leg, her cheeks burning. "It is just a mark, Kai. It means nothing." "It means everything," Kai countered. "Your stepmother, she was dying. Was she not?" "Yes," Elena whispered. "Her name was Adza. She died when I was 10. Adza means simply the woman in our tongue," Kai said. "Did she tell you where you came from before your father brought you to the ranch?" I was born in the East." Elena recited the story William had told her 100 times. "My mother died in childbirth. My father brought me here." "And yet," Kai said, pointing to the mark, "you bear the symbol of the Wind Clan, a symbol that is often tattooed on infants who are found or saved, to mark them under the protection of the spirits." The air in the cave seemed to grow thinner. Elena felt a wave of dizziness. She remembered vague flashes, a warm back carrying her, the smell of sage smoke, a song that was not in English. She had always thought they were memories of Adza, but what if they were older? "Are you saying—" Elena started, but she could not finish the sentence. "I am saying that the truth is a river that runs underground," Kai said. "Sometimes it surfaces where we least expect it. Your husband, and perhaps your father, may have kept secrets to protect you, or to own you." He poured water from his canteen onto a strip of clean cloth he tore from his own shirt. He leaned forward again. "This will sting." He cleaned the wound efficiently. Elena hissed in pain, her hand instinctively gripping his shoulder for support. Under her palm, she felt the hard muscle of his arm tense, but he did not pull away. The proximity was sudden and overwhelming. In the small cave, with the smell of blood and rain in the air, the barrier between them felt incredibly thin. She was half naked, wounded, and clinging to a man society said was her enemy. And yet, she felt safer in this dark hole than she had in the bank, or the sheriff's office, or her own front porch. Kai tied the bandage tight. He looked up, and their faces were inches apart. Elena could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You said end it," Kai said softly. "You thought I would hurt you." "I was afraid," Elena admitted. "They said." "They lie," Kai said. "About me, about my people, and about you." He stood up, breaking the moment before it could shatter her completely. He walked to the mouth of the cave and gestured for her to join him. "Can you stand?" Elena gritted her teeth and pushed herself up. The pain was sharp, but bearable. She limped to the entrance and looked out. The scene below was a nightmare. The shooting had stopped, but the fires had started. Monroe's soldiers were regrouping, but many lay dead. Sloane's mercenaries were moving among the fallen bodies not to help, but to plant evidence. She watched through the spyglass Kai handed her as the man with the notched boot placed a Navajo bow next to a dead trooper. "You see?" Kai asked. "Tomorrow, the newspapers in Santa Fe will say that the Navajo lured the brave soldiers into a trap. They will say the savages slaughtered them. Monroe will demand a war of extermination, and Sloane will get his land." Elena lowered the glass. The tears that fell now were not from fear, but from a rage that was colder and harder than the stone she leaned against. "They killed their own men," she whispered, "just to tell a story." "And they tried to kill you," Kai reminded her, "because you are the loose thread that could unravel the whole tapestry." He turned to her. "We cannot go back to San Miguel. Not tonight. If they find you alive, they will finish what the fall did not. You are dead to them now. Elena, that is your only advantage." "Where do we go?" Elena asked. She looked at the man standing beside her. He was no longer a stranger. He was the only truth left in a world of lies. "We go to the place where the spiral leads," Kai said. "Deep into the canyon, to the stronghold of the Dine. There is an elder there, my Uncle Ashki. He remembers the old stories. He might know the truth about your mark, and he will know how to expose Sloane." Elena looked down at her torn dress, her bloodied leg, and the ruin of the life she had tried so hard to save. The ranch seemed very far away now. The debt to the bank seemed trivial compared to the debt of blood she had just witnessed. "I will go with you," she said. "It will be hard," Kai warned. "We will be hunted." "I have been hunted since I was born." "Apparently," Elena said, touching the bandage on her hip. "I am just now realizing who the hunter is." Kai nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. He offered her his hand. It was a gesture of equality, not charity. "Come," he said. "The sun is setting. We must move while the shadows are long." They slipped out of the cave as the twilight turned the red rocks to purple. Below them, the fires of the betrayed army burned like the eyes of hell. But above them, the first stars of the evening were beginning to shine, indifferent and pure. Elena Hart limped into the wilderness, leaving the white world behind, guided by a warrior and a mark on her skin that whispered of a destiny she was only beginning to understand. The journey deeper into the canyon was a descent into a world that time seemed to have forgotten. The red walls rose like the ribs of the earth, narrowing until the sky was nothing more than a jagged scar of indigo high above. Elena Hart rode behind Kai Nez, her body aching from the fall and the jagged cut on her hip. But her mind was alert, sharp with the adrenaline of survival. They emerged from a narrow fissure into a hidden box canyon, and Elena braced herself. She expected to see a war camp. She expected painted warriors sharpening knives, stolen loot piled high, and the savage atmosphere that Major Monroe had described with such vivid hatred in the town square. Instead, she saw a village of ghosts and survivors. Makeshift shelters of brush and worn canvas clung to the canyon walls. There were no piles of gold, only meager stacks of firewood. The people who looked up as Kai rode in were not bloodthirsty raiders. They were old men with skin like cracked leather, women weaving baskets with fingers stiff from cold, and children, so many children, with hollow cheeks and eyes that were too big for their faces. A silence fell over the camp as Elena rode through. It was not a silence of respect, but of fear and suspicion. She could feel their eyes on her pale skin, on her riding clothes that marked her as one of the encroachers. She was the enemy. She was the wife of the man they were accused of killing. A young woman with a baby strapped to her back stepped forward, shouting something sharp and angry in Navajo. She pointed an accusing finger at Elena. Kai dismounted and stepped between them. He spoke calmly, his voice carrying authority. He did not apologize, but he did not back down. He gestured to Elena, then to the path they had come from, and finally to the sky. The woman's expression did not soften, but she stepped back, clutching her child closer. "They do not want you here," Kai said, walking back to Elena's horse to help her down. "They say you bring the blue coats with you." "I did bring them," Elena whispered, guilt washing over her as she looked at a group of children huddling near a small fire. "I led them to the entrance." "You stopped," Kai reminded her. "Come, there is someone you must see." He led her to the rear of the canyon, where a small hogan was built against the sheer rock face. Inside, the air smelled of cedar smoke and drying herbs. An old man sat on a sheepskin rug near the fire. His hair was white as snow, tied back with a simple leather thong, and his face was a map of deep lines etched by 80 years of desert sun. This was Ashki Yazi, the Uncle Kai had spoken of. Kai spoke to the old man in their tongue, gesturing to Elena. The old man listened, his milky eyes fixed on the fire. Then, he turned his head toward Elena. "Come closer, daughter of the Iron Plow," Ashki said. His English was slow, heavily accented, but clear. Elena stepped forward, favoring her injured leg. "I am Elena Hart." "I know the name," Ashki said. "I knew the man who gave it to you, and I knew the man who came before him." Elena frowned. "My father." "Show him the mark," Kai said gently from the doorway. Elena hesitated. The wound on her hip was throbbing, but it was the exposure that terrified her. Slowly, she untied the makeshift bandage Kai had applied in the cave. She lowered the torn fabric of her skirt just enough to reveal the spiral birthmark on her hip. Ashki leaned forward. He reached out a trembling hand, his dry fingertips brushing the air above the mark. He let out a long, wheezing breath that sounded like a prayer. "The wind spirit," he murmured. "It has returned." "What does it mean?" Elena asked. "Kai said my stepmother knew of it." "Your stepmother was a good woman," Ashki said. "But she was not the first of the dying to hold you. 30 winters ago, a white man came to these canyons. He was a surveyor, hurt by a rock slide, dying of thirst. A woman of the Wind clan found him. She nursed him back to life. They violated the laws of both our peoples to be together." Elena felt the room spin. "My father never said—" "He loved her," Ashki continued. "And when the child came a girl with hair like corn silk, but the mark of the clan on her skin, they were happy. But the army came. The cavalry attacked the winter camp. To save the child, the father took her. He ran back to his own people. He cut all ties to save her life. He told her she was white, wholly white, so that the world would not devour her." Tears pricked Elena's eyes. "My mother? She didn't die in childbirth in the East. She died holding the line so you and your father could escape," Ashki said softly. "You are of this earth. Elena, the blood that runs in you is the blood of the people starving outside this door." Elena sank to her knees, her entire life the feeling of never quite fitting in the parlors of the East, the strange comfort she felt in the silence of the desert, the way the Navajo language rolled off her tongue when her stepmother taught her it all made sense. She was not an invader. She was a ghost returning home. That night, the temperature in the canyon plummeted. The wind howled through the rocks, sounding like the mourning cries of the ancestors Ashki had spoken of. Kai built a small fire near the shelter he had cleared for Elena. She sat wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, staring into the flames. The revelation of her heritage sat heavy on her shoulders, a burden and a gift she did not yet know how to carry. She watched Kai moving through the camp earlier. She had seen him lift a small boy onto his shoulders, making the child laugh for a moment. She had seen him give his own portion of dried meat to an elder. In San Miguel, they called him a killer, a renegade. Here, he was the pillar holding up a collapsing sky. He came and sat beside her, close enough to block the wind but respectful of her space. "My brothers died in the first year of the railroad survey," Kai said quietly, staring at the fire. "They tried to stop the men from dynamiting the sacred arch. The company guards shot them. That was when I joined the army as a scout. I thought if I helped them, I could guide them away from the holy places. I thought I could change them from the inside, but you couldn't," Elena said. "The railroad does not change." Kai said, "It only hungers. It eats stone, wood, and men, and now it wants this canyon." "William," Elena started, her voice choking. "My husband, he hated the railroad too. He said it squeezed the life out of the small ranchers. I think that is why he refused to sell to Sloan last year. And that is why he had to die." Kai finished for her. "Sloan removes obstacles. He killed your husband to break you. He attacked the Mexican traders to anger the town. He wants a war so the army will clear this land for free, and he can lay his tracks over the bones of my people." Elena looked at him. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, illuminating the sharp angles of his face. He was beautiful in a way that terrified her, raw, intense, and utterly real. A shiver racked her body, born of cold and shock. Kai noticed. Without a word, he unclasped his heavy buffalo hide cloak and draped it over her shoulders, pulling it tight. He did not pull his hands away immediately. His fingers lingered on the collar of the cloak near her neck. Elena stopped breathing. She turned her head, looking up at him. His face was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the biting wind. The memory of the cave returned the feeling of his hands on her skin, the way he had looked at her not as a victim, but as a revelation. His hand moved, his thumb grazing her jawline. It was a rough, calloused touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. Elena leaned into it instinctively, her eyes fluttering shut. The pull was magnetic, undeniable. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to forget the grief, the debt, the lies, and just be held by the one person who knew the truth of who she was. Kai leaned in. His breath brushed her lips. But then the image of William's face flashed in her mind, and the image of the starving children. Elena pulled back sharply, turning her face away. I can't." Kai froze. He withdrew his hand slowly. "I am sorry. I should not have—" "No," Elena said, her voice trembling. "It is not that I do not want to, but everything it is too much. The lies, my husband, my father—" "You are grieving," Kai said, his voice gentle again. "And you are at war. There is no shame in that." "We need to stop them," Elena said, hardening her voice, pushing the desire down deep where it could burn without consuming her. "We need proof, real proof that a judge in Santa Fe cannot ignore." "Sloan keeps records," Kai said. "He is a man of business. He will have invoices for the mercenaries. He will have a map of the new route." "I can get them," Elena said. "I have to go back. To San Miguel." "It is a trap," Kai warned. "I am the bait," Elena replied. "They think I am a victim. They think I am scared and pliable. I will use that." The ride back to San Miguel 2 days later was a performance. Elena rubbed dust into her face and tore her clothes further to look the part of a woman who had crawled through hell. Kai rode with her until the outskirts, then melted into the shadows of the old mining tunnels that ran beneath the town's perimeter, a network known only to the Mexican miners and the Navajo. Elena walked into town on foot, limping. When the first citizens saw her, a cry went up that brought the whole town running. Major Monroe pushed through the crowd, his arm in a sling from a graze he had received during the chaotic retreat. When he saw Elena, His face lit up not with relief, but with opportunity. "She lives!" Monroe shouted to the crowd. "Mrs. Hart has returned from the savages." He tried to embrace her, but Elena flinched, playing the traumatized widow perfectly. They were everywhere," she stammered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "But I escaped. I hid." "Brave woman," Sloane appeared, looking immaculate and concerned. "Come, my dear, get her to the doctor, then bring her to my office. We must hear everything." An hour later, Eliana sat in Everett Sloane's office at the back of the railroad station. She had been bandaged by the town doctor and given a fresh dress, though she refused to wash the terror from her face. Sloane poured her a glass of brandy. "Drink this. It will steady the nerves." "Thank you, Mr. Sloane," Elena said, keeping her eyes downcast. I worry about the bank. I failed to lead the major through the deal." "Hush now," Sloane said, patting her hand. "You survived. That is what matters. And your bravery has galvanized the territory. Look," he gestured to the window. Outside, a mob was gathering. A man named Vance, the vice sheriff, was standing on a crate, shouting, "They tried to kill a white woman. They slaughtered our boys. No more treaties. We hang every redskin we see." "The governor has authorized a full regiment," Sloane said with satisfaction. "They arrive next week. We will clear the canyon once and for all." "But my farm," Elena pressed, making her voice whine slightly. "I will take care of the bank," Sloane said. "In fact, leave the papers with me. I have some business to attend to regarding the next phase of the expansion." "Just wait here a moment." Sloane left the room to speak to a foreman outside. The moment the door clicked shut, Elena's demeanor changed. The scared widow vanished. She moved to his desk. She shuffled through the papers, bills of lading, schedules, and then, under a ledger, she found it. A letter from a private security firm in Denver regarding your request for 20 specialized contractors. Final payment due upon completion of the clearing of Sector 4. Make it look like local hostilities. And beneath that, a map. It showed the rail line going straight through the Navajo Canyon. But it also showed something else, a plan to derail a civilian train. Elena heard the door handle turn. She shoved the papers back, slipping the letter into her bodice, and collapsed back into the chair, trembling. Sloane entered, smiling. "Now, where were we?" "Mr. Sloane," Elena said, looking up with wide eyes. "I heard them talking. In the canyon, the Navajo—" "Oh," Sloane leaned in. They said they are not afraid of the army. They are waiting for the Iron Horse, the one that carries the settlers." Sloane's eyes narrowed, then sparked with a cruel delight. He thought she was confirming his own staged plan. "Did they know well? We shall be ready for them." He was going to attack the settler train. He was going to kill innocent families and blame it on the Navajo to ensure the governor sent the regiment. That night, the town was a powder keg. The saloon was overflowing with angry men. Gunshots were fired into the air. Elena slipped out the back of the hotel. She made her way to a dilapidated shed near the old water tower at the edge of town. The wind was whipping up the sand, creating a blinding haze. Kai was waiting in the shadows of the shed. "Did you find it?" he asked. "I have the letter," Elena said, pulling it from her dress. "And I know the plan. There is a train coming in 3 days, the Silver Star, carrying settlers from the east. Sloane's mercenaries are going to attack it at the Painted Gorge. They are going to burn the cars. If they attack a settler train, the whole country will demand our blood," Kai said grimly. "We cannot stop the train. We do not have the men." "We don't have to stop it," Elena said. "We have to be on it." "What?" "We have to catch them in the act," Elena said, her eyes fierce. "We need witnesses, not just me, the passengers. If we can expose the mercenaries while they are attacking, if we can unmask them in front of the world—" "It is suicide," Kai said. "You will be trapped in a metal box while they shoot at it." "It is the only way," Elena insisted. "I will get on that train as a guest of the railroad. You have to find a way aboard." I can climb, Kai said. But Elena, if this goes wrong... He stepped closer. The space between them in the dark shed felt charged. Electric. The danger outside made the air inside feel heavy with unsaid things. If this goes wrong, Elena whispered, then we die. But we die standing. Kai reached out, cupping her face in his hands. This time, she did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her hands gripping the rough fabric of his shirt. You are a warrior. Elena Hart, Kai murmured, more than any man I have known. He lowered his head. His lips met hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and dust and fear. It was the collision of two worlds that had been kept apart for too long. Elena opened her mouth to him, a small sound of need escaping her throat. His arms went around her, pulling her crushed against his chest. She felt the beat of his heart, steady and strong against her own. For a moment, the war did not exist. Sloan did not exist. There was only the heat of his skin, the roughness of his hands, and the desperate, hungry slide of their lips. Kai pulled back, breathing heavily, his forehead resting against hers. I will not let you die on that train. Then don't die on the roof, Elena whispered back, her voice husky. 3 days. Kai said, I will meet you at the water tower before the train departs. We will finish this. He kissed her once more, hard and quick, a seal on a pact that might be their last. Then he slipped out into the night, leaving Elena alone in the dark, her lips burning, her heart wild, and a letter in her pocket that weighed as much as a tombstone. The rain fell in sheets, a torrential downpour that turned the Arizona dust into slick, red mud. Lightning tore the sky open, illuminating the iron beast that sat hissing on the tracks at the San Miguel depot. The Silver Star, a locomotive of polished steel and brass, was ready for its maiden voyage to the settlement of redemption. It carried 50 souls' families from the east, clutching Bibles and deeds to land they had never seen. But in the rear car, attached like a parasite to the host, sat 20 men who were not settlers. They were hard men, smelling of wet wool and gun oil, paid by Everett Sloan to ensure that the Silver Star never reached its destination intact. Elena Hart sat in the private carriage near the front, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a dress of dark blue silk, purchased by Sloan to make her look the part of the respectable widow. Across from her, Sloan swirled a glass of brandy, watching the rain lash against the window. A tempestuous night for a journey, Sloan observed, his voice smooth. But fitting. History is often forged in the storm. It is, Elena agreed, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Do you think the Navajo will strike in this weather? Sloan smiled, a predator showing his teeth. Savages are unpredictable, Mrs. Hart. But do not worry. My security team is in the rear car. They are prepared for any eventuality. Elena knew exactly how prepared they were. She had seen the crates of dynamite loaded on board. She knew the plan because she had stolen the map. At the Painted Gorge, 10 miles out, the train would slow for the curve. The mercenaries would set fire to the passenger cars, shoot the fleeing settlers, and leave Navajo arrows scattered among the dead. Major Monroe, waiting at the gorge with a cavalry detachment, would ride in to save the survivors and discover the Navajo atrocity. It was a script written in blood, and she was the only one who could rewrite it. I am feeling a bit faint. Mr. Sloan. Elena lied, pressing a hand to her forehead. The air in here is stifling. I need to stand in the vestibule for a moment. Of course, Sloan said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Do not go far. Elena stepped out into the vestibule between the cars. The roar of the wheels on the track was deafening, amplified by the wind howling through the open sides. The train was picking up speed, chugging rhythmically toward the mountains. She gripped the cold iron railing and looked up. The roof of the train was slick with rain. Somewhere up there, crawling on hands and knees against the gale, was Kai Nez. Kai pressed his body flat against the roof of the passenger car as a jagged bolt of lightning lit up the world. The wind tore at his clothes. threatening to hurl him into the black void of the canyon passing below. He was soaked to the bone, his fingers numb, but his mind was sharp. He had boarded the train as it left the station, leaping from the water tower onto the moving roof. It had been a desperate jump, but desperation was all they had left. He crawled forward, inch by inch, toward the rear car. He could hear the laughter of the mercenaries below him through the ventilation shafts. He reached the gap between the passenger car and the mercenary car. He peered down. Through the glass of the door, he saw a man he recognized. It was the bearded giant with the notched boot, the leader of the false raiders. The man was passing out bottles of whiskey and bundles of arrows. "Remember, boys," the man shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Scalp a few of them if you have to, but make sure the arrows are visible. We want the governor to vomit when he sees the photos." Kai felt a surge of cold fury. These men were not just killers, they were architects of hatred. He checked his revolver. 5 rounds. He had to disable the mercenaries before they reached the gorge. He had to separate their car from the rest of the train. He began to climb down the ladder at the rear of the car, intending to uncouple it. But as he swung his leg over the side, the door below opened. A mercenary had stepped out to relieve himself off the side of the moving train. He looked up. His eyes met Kai's. For a second, there was only the sound of the rain. "Indian!" the man screamed, reaching for his holster. Kai didn't hesitate. He kicked the man in the face, sending him tumbling backward into the car. But the scream had raised the alarm. "We have a rat on the roof," a voice bellowed. Bullets punched through the wooden ceiling, splintering the planks inches from Kai's face. He scrambled back up, rolling to the center of the roof as the mercenaries poured out onto the rear platform, firing wildly into the night, inside the vestibule. Elena heard the gunfire. It was starting too soon. They were miles from the gorge. She pulled the small Derringer pistol she had hidden in her sleeve, but she knew it was useless against 20 men with rifles. She needed to do something drastic. She looked at the coupling mechanism connecting the mercenary car to the passenger car. It was a heavy iron pin, held in place by tension. If she could pull it, the rear car would be cut loose. But the train was moving too fast. The tension was immense. Suddenly, the door to the mercenary car kicked open. The bearded leader stepped out, a Winchester rifle in his hand. He saw Elena. "Well, well," he sneered, raising the rifle. "Looks like the widow wants to join the party. Get back inside, lady, or you'll be the first casualty of the Navajo attack." Elena froze. Above them, she heard the thud of boots. Kai dropped from the roof behind the mercenary, landing on the small metal platform. "Behind you!" Elena screamed. The mercenary spun around. Kai struck him with the butt of his pistol, but the man was huge. He absorbed the blow and slammed his shoulder into Kai, pinning him against the railing. The 2 men grappled in the rain, slipping on the wet metal. More mercenaries were crowding the doorway, raising their guns. "Shoot him!" one yelled. "Shoot the redskin!" Kai was using the bearded man as a shield, but he was losing his footing. He locked eyes with Elena. There was no plea in his gaze, only a command. "Do it!" Elena looked at the mercenary closest to the door, a young man with blonde hair who looked like he could be a farmhand from Ohio. He was leveling his rifle at Kai's head. If she did nothing, Kai died. If she acted, she crossed a line she could never uncross. She would be shooting a white man to save a Navajo, in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of Major Monroe. It was treason. Elena raised her arm. Her hand did not shake. She thought of the stone in the horse's hoof. She thought of the lies. "He is not the enemy," she shouted, though she knew they would not listen. "You are." She pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the blonde mercenary in the shoulder. He cried out, dropping his rifle and falling back into the men behind him, creating a momentary bottleneck. The bearded leader, distracted by the shot, loosened his grip. Kai drove his knee into the man's stomach and shoved him hard. The mercenary tumbled over the railing, vanishing into the dark churn of the wheels and the canyon floor. "Pull the pin!" Kai roared at Elena. He threw himself across the gap. grabbing the brake wheel of the passenger car and spinning it with all his strength. The brakes shrieked, sparks flying like fireworks. The sudden deceleration caused the cars to slam together, relieving the tension on the coupling for a fraction of a second. Elena grabbed the heavy iron lever. She screamed with effort, putting her entire body weight into it. The pin slid free. The mercenary car, carried by its own momentum but disconnected from the engine, began to drift away. The gap widened 1 foot, 2 feet. The mercenaries stood in the doorway, firing their rifles in futile rage as they watched their prey accelerate away from them. But the Silver Star was not safe yet. The sudden braking and the loss of the rear weight on the slick tracks made the remaining cars sway violently. "Get inside," Kai shouted, grabbing Elena and pulling her into the passenger car just as the train hit the curve of the painted gorge. The wheels screamed in protest. Luggage flew from the overhead racks. Passengers screamed as the train tilted dangerously. It did not derail, but it skidded to a halt 100 yards past the bend, steam hissing from the relief valves like the breath of a dying dragon. Elena and Kai lay on the floor of the aisle, tangled together. The car was filled with the sounds of crying children and panicked prayers. "Are you hurt?" Kai asked, his hands checking her for wounds. "No," Elena gasped. "But Monroe, he will be waiting. He will hear the train stop," Kai said. "He will come to finish the job." Elena stood up. Her dress was ruined, stained with oil and rain. She looked at the passengers, men, women, children, huddled in fear. "Listen to me," she shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. "The men who attacked us were not Navajo. They were hired killers working for the railroad. Major Monroe is out there, and he is coming to kill us, to hide the truth." A man in a bowler hat stood up. "That's treason. Woman Major Monroe is a hero." "Major Monroe is a murderer," Elena retorted. She pointed to the window. "Look, here comes your hero." Through the rain-streaked glass, they could see torches approaching. A column of cavalry was riding toward the stalled train, but they were not riding in formation to rescue. They were fanning out, sabers drawn, guns ready. Major Monroe rode to the front. He saw the detached mercenary car far back down the track, sitting uselessly in the dark. He saw the passenger cars intact. His plan was in ruins. "No witnesses," Monroe shouted to his troops. "The savages have taken the train. Fire it, we'll kill the hostiles." "He's firing on us," a woman screamed as a bullet shattered a window, showering them with glass. The passengers hit the floor. The man in the bowler hat looked at Elena with wide, terrified eyes. "My God, you were right. Get down," Kai yelled. He kicked open the emergency door. "Elena, we have to draw their fire. If we stay here, they will massacre everyone to get to us." "The rocks," Elena said, pointing to a cluster of boulders near the track. "If we can get there, we can hold them off." They jumped from the train into the mud. Bullets zipped past them like angry hornets. They scrambled over the wet ballast, diving behind the granite slabs just as a volley of carbine fire chipped away the stone above their heads. Monroe saw them. "There, the traitor and her pet bring me their heads," Monroe charged, spurring his black stallion. He was abandoning all pretense of command. He was a madman, consuming his own war. Kai raised his revolver. He fired, but his hand was shaking from the cold and the exertion. The shot went wide. Monroe was closing in, his saber raised high, gleaming in the torchlight. He was bearing down on Elena. "For the Union!" Monroe screamed, slashing downward. Kai threw himself in front of Elena. The heavy cavalry saber did not strike true, but the flat of the blade and the force of the horse knocked Kai backward. He hit the ground hard. Monroe wheeled his horse around, pulling his service revolver. "Goodbye, Mrs. Hart," Monroe sneered, leveling the gun at Elena's chest. Elena lay in the mud, her hands searching frantically for her derringer. It had fallen. She was defenseless. Bang Monroe jerked in his saddle. He looked down at his chest, a look of utter confusion on his face. A bloom of red was spreading across his pristine blue uniform. He looked up. Elena was holding Kai's revolver. She had snatched it from the mud when Kai fell. Her hands were shaking, but her aim had been true. She had shot him through the heart. "You—" Monroe gasped. "You shot an officer!" "No," Elena said, her voice cold and hollow as the rain washed over her face. "I shot a murderer!" Monroe slumped forward and fell from his horse, landing face down in the red mud he had wanted to conquer. Silence fell over the gorge. The soldiers, seeing their commander dead, hesitated. They lowered their rifles, unsure of their orders. Then, a new sound cut through the storm. A bugle, but it was not playing the charge. It was playing the call for parley. From the darkness of the east, a second group of riders emerged. They wore long duster coats and carried shotguns. At their lead was a man with a silver star on his chest, not a railroad badge, but the star of a United States Marshal. "Drop your weapons," the Marshal bellowed, his voice booming over the wind. "By order of the federal government, Everett Sloan is under arrest for conspiracy and murder. Major Monroe is relieved of command." The soldiers looked at Monroe's body, then at the Marshal, slowly, one by one. They dropped their carbines into the mud. It was over. Elena dropped the gun. Her knees gave way. She crawled through the slush to where Kai lay. He was pale, his eyes half closed. Blood was seeping from a gunshot wound in his side, a stray bullet from the initial volley that he had hidden from her until now. "Kai," she whispered, lifting his head into her lap. "Kai, look at me." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. He looked up at her, blinking against the rain. Did we stop them? We stopped them," Elena sobbed, brushing the wet hair from his forehead. "The Marshal is here. Sloan is finished." Kai smiled weakly. His hand reached up, staining her white shirt with his blood. "You shot him. A major." "I had to," Elena said. "They will call you a traitor." Kai rasped. "They will say you turned against your own kind." Elena looked at the dead major, then at the terrified passengers peering out of the train, and finally at the man in her arms, the man who had shielded her with his body, who had honored her torn dress, who had seen the truth written on her skin. "Do you regret it?" Kai asked, his voice fading. "Shooting your own kind." Elena gripped his hand, pressing it against the spiral birthmark on her hip beneath the soaked silk. "You are my kind, Kai," she whispered fiercely. "You are my blood." Kai's eyes closed, his breathing shallow. The Marshal was running toward them, calling for a medic. Elena rocked him back and forth in the rain, screaming for help, no longer caring about the debt, or the farm, or the railroad. The only thing that mattered was the heartbeat fading beneath her fingers. The storm raged on, washing the canyon clean, but it could not wash away the truth that had been revealed in the flash of gunpowder and lightning. The line between two worlds had been erased, and Elena Hart had finally chosen where she stood. The smoke from the locomotive had long since dissipated, scrubbed from the sky by the storm, but the smell of wet ash and copper blood lingered in the painted gorge. The sun rose on a scene that looked less like a victory and more like a reckoning. Everett Sloan sat on a crate near the water tower, his fine wool suit muddied and torn. His wrists were bound in iron cuffs. He did not look like a tycoon anymore. He looked small, a man whose ambition had outpaced his morality. Beside him, the body of Major Silas Monroe lay covered by a rough canvas tarp, the rain having washed away the blood but not the disgrace of his final moments. United States Marshal Jeremiah Stone, a man with a face like a dried riverbed and eyes that had seen too much of the frontier's ugliness, stood on the platform of the train station in San Miguel. He was taking statements, his pen scratching against the paper with a rhythmic, judgmental sound. Elena Hart sat on a bench nearby. She was still wearing the ruined blue silk dress, now dried and stiff with dirt. Her hands were wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She watched as the passengers of the Silver Star, the men and women she had saved, gave their accounts. "It was the lady," a woman from Ohio said, clutching her shawl. "She pulled the pin. She separated the cars. If she hadn't, those men with the torches, they would have burned us alive." "And the soldiers," a man added, his voice shaking with anger. "They fired on us. Major Monroe ordered them to fire on civilians. The marshal nodded. Writing it all down? The truth was piling up like stones on a cairn, heavy and undeniable. The mercenaries, those who had survived the crash of the rear car, were already singing like canaries in the temporary holding cells, trading Sloane's secrets for a chance to escape the hangman's noose. They confirmed the contracts, the false Navajo disguises, the orders to leave feathers and arrows at the scenes. But even with the truth laid bare in the harsh light of day, the town of San Miguel was not united. Elena could feel the stares burning into her back as she walked from the station to the small infirmary where they had taken Kai. The town was fractured. To the families on the train, she was a savior. But to the regulars at the Golden Nugget Saloon, to the men who had drunk Monroe's whiskey and believed in the glory of the Indian Wars, she was something else. Traitor! A voice hissed as she passed the general store. Elena turned. It was the wife of the local blacksmith, a woman who had always greeted her with a smile before. Now, her face was twisted in a sneer. "You killed an American officer?" the woman spat. "To save a savage. You sleep with them, don't you? You sold out your own race for a warm blanket." Elena stopped. Her hand drifted instinctively to her hip, though she wore no gun today. "I killed a man who was about to butcher 50 innocent people. Mrs. Gable, including your cousin who was on that train." The woman flinched, but the hate didn't leave her eyes. "Better they die Christian deaths than we bow to the heathen. You are marked. Elena Hart, you don't belong here anymore." Elena walked on, her head high, but the words cut deeper than the shale in the canyon. She had saved them, but she had broken the unwritten law of the frontier. You stick to your own. Right or wrong, by choosing Kai, she had exiled herself from the only society she had ever known. The infirmary was a small, whitewashed room at the back of the doctor's house. It smelled of carbolic acid and sage, a strange mixture of Western medicine and the herbs Ashki had brought in under the cover of darkness. Kainez lay on the iron cot. His chest was bandaged heavily where the bullet had grazed his ribs and punctured the muscle. He was pale. The vibrant copper of his skin faded to a dull clay color. But he was alive. Elena closed the door behind her, shutting out the whispers of the town. She moved to the basin, wringing out a cloth in cool water. She sat beside the bed and gently wiped the sweat from Kai's forehead. He stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. For a moment, there was confusion in his dark eyes, the instinct of a warrior waking in enemy territory. Then he saw her, and the tension left his shoulders. "You are still here," he rasped, his voice rough from smoke and disuse. "Where else would I be?" Elena asked softly. She traced the line of his jaw with the cool cloth. "The marshal. He has the evidence," Elena said. "Sloane is finished. He will hang, or he will spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. The railroad expansion through the canyon is halted pending a congressional investigation." Kai let out a breath, a long sigh of relief that seemed to deflate his entire frame. "So, it is done." "The fighting is done," Elena corrected. "The war, I don't know." Kai looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fatigue etched around her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak, but his skin was warm. "I heard them," Kai said. "Through the window, the people outside." "Ignore them," Elena said quickly. "They call you a traitor," Kai said. "Because of me." "They call me a traitor because I forced them to look in the mirror," Elena said fiercely. "And they didn't like what they saw." Kai squeezed her hand. "When I am strong enough to ride, I will go back to the high desert, to my people. That is where I belong." He paused, his thumb rubbing the back of her hand. "And you will have a choice. Elena, if I leave, the talk will die down. You can claim you were coerced. You can play the victim. The bank will likely settle with you to avoid more scandal. You can keep your farm. You can go back to being Mrs. Hart, the respectable widow." Elena pulled her hand away gently to adjust his pillow. "And if I don't want to be respectable?" "This world does not forgive women who walk between the lines," Kai said. "If you come with me, it is a hard life. We have no gold. We have no stone houses. We have only the wind and the struggle to survive. You are trying to scare me off, Elena said with a faint smile. I am trying to be fair. Kai whispered, I will not pull you from your world. Elena, I will not make you an outcast just to soothe my own heart. If you come, or if you stay, it must be your choice. Not a debt, not a rescue, a choice. Elena looked at him, lying there vulnerable, yet possessing a dignity that no man in San Miguel could match. She wanted to say, I choose you, but the fear was there. The fear of poverty, of isolation, of losing the land her father had died to give her. Rest now, she said, avoiding the answer. We can talk about tomorrow, when it comes. 2 days later, the political reality of the situation began to take shape. Marshal Stone summoned Elena, the acting mayor, and Ashki Yazi, who had come into town under a flag of truce, to the sheriff's office. The mood was tense. The acting mayor, a nervous man named Higgins, looked at Ashki as if he expected the old man to pull a tomahawk from his robes. Ashki sat impassively, his hands resting on his knees, looking like a stone monument that had weathered worse storms than this. Washington has telegraphed, Marshal Stone said, placing a heavy hand on the table. They want this mess cleaned up, quietly. The trial of Everett Sloan will happen in Denver, but as for the local situation, he slid a document across the table. This is a temporary treaty, Stone said. The railroad agrees to reroute the main line 10 miles south, avoiding the Spider Rock Canyon. The Army agrees to cease all operations against the Navajo in this sector, provided there are no further raids. We never raided, Ashki said, his voice calm. We only defended. Regardless, Stone said, the attacks stop on both sides. He turned to Elena. And as for you, Mrs. Hart, the railroad is eager to make amends for Mr. Sloan's criminal behavior. They are offering a settlement, $5,000, enough to pay off your mortgage 10 times over and stock your herd with the finest cattle in the territory. Elena stared at the check. It was a fortune. It was security. It was the life William had dreamed of. There is a condition. Higgins, the mayor, interjected quickly. To receive the funds, you must sign a statement saying that while you acted bravely, you were under extreme duress, that your association with the Navajo Scout was purely a matter of survival, and that you renounce any further connection with the tribe. Elena looked up. You want me to lie? You want me to say I despise them? We want you to help heal the town, Higgins said. People are angry. Elena, if you take the money and live quietly, they will forgive you eventually. But if you continue to fraternize with the element that killed our boys, your boys were killed by Sloan's mercenaries. Elena reminded him. Perception is reality. Mrs. Hart, Stone said gently, the town needs a widow to pity, not a rebel to fear. Take the money. Save your ranch. Let the Navajo go back to their canyons. It is the best outcome for everyone. Elena looked at Ashki. The old man did not speak. He did not plead. He simply looked at her with eyes that held the depth of the sky. The desert does not care if you are white or Navajo, Ashki said softly, speaking to the room but looking only at her. The rocks do not care about your banknotes. The wind only asks one thing, are you brave enough to live true, or will you live a life painted over with lies, like the men who attacked the wagons? Elena looked at the check. Then she looked at the treaty. I will sign the treaty as a witness, Elena said, taking the pen. I will testify against Sloan. She pushed the check back toward the marshal. But I will not sign your statement, she said. I will not denounce the man who saved my life, and I will not deny the blood that runs in my veins, however thin it may be. Higgins gaped. You are refusing $5,000? The bank will foreclose. Let them try, Elena said, standing up. I suspect the publicity of foreclosing on the heroine of the Silver Star would not be good for business. I will pay my debt, in my own time, and in my own way. She walked out of the office, leaving the money on the table. She felt lighter than she had in years. She was broke. She was a pariah. But she was free. That night, The eve of Kai's departure, the town was quiet. The moon hung low and heavy over San Miguel. Elena sat on the porch of the small infirmary, listening to the crickets. The door creaked open. Kai stepped out. He was dressed in his buckskins again, his shoulders stiff but his movement steady. He held his hat in his hands. "You should be resting," Elena said, though she did not tell him to go back inside. "I have rested enough." Kai said, "Tomorrow, at dawn. I ride." He sat beside her on the bench. The distance between them was small, but it felt charged with the electricity of the unsaid. "I heard what you did," Kai said. "Ashki told me. You refused the money." "It was blood money," Elena said. "It came with strings I could not accept. It could have saved your land." Kai said, "It would have cost me my soul," Elena replied. She turned to him. "You told me in the cave that I was a bridge between two worlds. Bridges get walked on. Kai, I expect that, but I will not be burned down." Kai looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion that was raw and terrifyingly open. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known, and the most stubborn. I learned from the best." She smiled. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her lips. The air around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the heat of his skin and the scent of sage and rain that clung to him. "Elena?" he whispered. He leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. No memories of dead husbands or burning wagons to pull her back. She met him halfway. The kiss was different from the one in the shed. That had been desperate, a frantic grasp for life in the face of death. This was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question and an answer all at once. He pulled her closer, his good arm wrapping around her waist, drawing her against the solid wall of his chest. Elena buried her hands in his hair, pulling him deeper. She felt the roughness of his stubble, the warmth of his breath, the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her own. They moved inside, into the shadows of the small room. There was no shame in the way they touched, only a profound sense of recognition. When he unbuttoned her dress, his hands were reverent. He traced the spiral mark on her hip with his lips, a silent worship of the history that bound them. "I am here," she whispered into the darkness. "I am yours." "And I am yours," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. For as long as the grass grows and the wind blows, they came together on the narrow cot, not as a widow and a warrior, not as white and Indian, but as two souls who had walked through fire to find the only other person who understood the burn. It was a claiming, fierce and tender, a physical manifestation of the choice she had made in the marshal's office. She chose this. She chose him, and for the first time in her life, Elena Hart did not feel like she was acting a part. She felt whole. The dawn came too early, painting the sky in streaks of violet and orange. The air was cold and crisp. Elena stood by the hitching post as Kai saddled his horse. The Appaloosa snorted, sensing the journey ahead. Kai checked the cinch, then turned to her. He did not ask her to come. He knew she could not leave yet. She had a ranch to defend, a reputation to rebuild, or perhaps to dismantle brick by brick. And he had a people to heal, a treaty to enforce. "This is not goodbye," Kai said, taking her hands. "No," Elena agreed. "It is just until the town will make it hard for you," Kai warned. "Let them," Elena said, her chin lifting. "I have a Winchester, and I have the truth, and—" She placed a hand over her heart. "I have this," Kai smiled, a true smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He leaned down and kissed her one last time, a lingering promise sealed in the morning light. "Watch the horizon. Elena Hart," he said, "when the dust rises in the east, know that I am thinking of you." He swung into the saddle, the movement fluid despite his injury. He raised a hand in salute, then turned the horse toward the open desert. Elena watched him ride away. She watched until he was just a speck against the red cliffs, until the dust of his passing had settled back onto the earth. She stood there for a long time. The town was waking up behind her. She could hear the first wagon wheels on the street, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Soon, the whispers would start again. The judgment, the isolation. But as Elena turned back toward the infirmary to gather her things, she did not look down. She looked at the rising sun. She touched the spot on her hip where the spiral marked her skin. And she smiled. The debt was still there. The future was uncertain, but the fear was gone. She was Elena Hart, daughter of the wind, survivor of the Silver Star, and she had a life to live, a life that was finally, truly, her own. The heat of the Arizona summer had finally broken, surrendering to the crisp, biting winds of November. The red earth, usually baked hard as iron, had softened under the autumn rains, allowing a thin, stubborn layer of green grass to push through the soil. It was a season of change, subtle but undeniable, much like the shift that had taken place in the soul of the territory. In the newspapers back east, the trial of Everett Sloan had become a sensation. The headlines screamed of railroad tyranny and corruption on the frontier. The story of the rigged ambushes and the murdered major had sold thousands of copies in New York and Boston. But here, in the shadow of the mesas, the ink had long since dried. The people of San Miguel did not care for old news. They were pragmatic people, more concerned with the price of winter feed and the mending of fences than with moral victories won in courtrooms 2,000 miles away. They wanted to forget the ugliness. They wanted to bury the memory of their own complicity in the red dirt and move on. Elena Hart had let them forget, but she had not let them ignore her. She stood on the porch of a building that had not existed 4 months ago. It was a simple structure, built from rough-hewn pine and adobe, situated on a flat ridge of land that sat squarely between the boundary of her ranch and the edge of the Navajo territory. It was no cathedral, but to Elena, it was more sacred than any church in town. Above the door, a sign painted in neat, black letters read, "The Red Earth School." Elena wiped the chalk dust from her hands onto her apron. She looked different now. The heavy morning black she had worn for William was gone, replaced by practical calico in shades of sage green and earth brown. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping to frame a face that had lost its gaunt look of desperation and gained a quiet, sun-weathered strength. Inside the schoolroom, the noise was a dull roar of energy. It was the sound of the future being forged. "Sit down. Thomas," Elena called out, her voice firm but lacking the sharp edge of fear that used to define her. "And do not pull Little Bear's braid." Thomas, the son of the town blacksmith, the same blacksmith whose wife had spat at Elena on the street months ago, sat down sheepishly. Next to him, Little Bear, a Navajo boy with eyes like obsidian, suppressed a grin. The classroom was a tapestry of the borderlands. There were 12 children in total. 5 were the sons and daughters of white settlers. 4 were Navajo children who walked down from the canyon encampments each morning. 3 were Mexicano children from the mining families. At first, the parents had been horrified. The town had whispered that Elena was running a school for heathens. But Elena had been shrewd. She had saved her ranch not by bowing to the railroad, but by selling the southern pasture to a family of poor Irish immigrants who needed a start. That sale had cleared her immediate debts without compromising her soul. And then, she had made the town an offer they could not refuse. She taught reading. Yes, but she also taught trade mathematics. She taught the children how to weigh grain, how to calculate interest, and, most importantly, she taught them languages. She taught the white children the Navajo words for water, trade, and peace. She taught the Navajo children the English words for contract, law, and property. When Thomas had gone home and successfully translated a negotiation between his father and a Navajo sheep herder, saving the blacksmith $10, the complaints about the school had suddenly gone quiet. Utility, Elena had learned, was the quickest path to acceptance in the West. The school day ended with the ringing of a heavy iron bell. The children spilled out into the yard, a chaotic mix of laughter and running feet. Elena watched them go. She saw a Mexicano girl sharing a piece of cornbread with a settler boy. She saw the Navajo children racing the white children to the creek. their differences forgotten in the universal language of play. It was not perfect. There were still fights. There were still names called in anger. But it was a start. Elena stepped down from the porch, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, setting the canyon walls on fire with brilliant shades of crimson and violet. It was her favorite time of day, but also the loneliest. She walked toward the ridge that overlooked the valley. She did this every evening. She told herself she was checking the weather, or looking for strays, but she knew the truth. She was watching the horizon. Watch the horizon. Elena Hart. When the dust rises in the east, know that I am thinking of you. Kai had been gone for 4 months. The treaty had been held, mostly. There were no soldiers in the canyon. The railroad had grumbled and protested, but the federal investigation had forced them to reroute the line 10 miles south, away from the sacred grounds. It was an inconvenience for the company, but a salvation for the dying. Elena reached the edge of the ridge. The wind whipped at her skirt. She looked out at the vast, empty expanse of the desert. "You are thinking of me today," she whispered to the wind. "I can feel it." She was about to turn back when she saw it. A silhouette against the burning sun. A lone rider, moving with a steady, unhurried pace. Elena's heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer a rhythm against her ribs that she had not felt since the night in the infirmary. She shaded her eyes. It was an Appaloosa, and the rider sat tall, his posture as familiar to her as her own reflection. She did not run. She stood rooted to the spot, afraid that if she moved, the mirage would vanish. But the rider kept coming. He rode up the incline toward the schoolhouse, the dust swirling around his horse's hooves like golden smoke. He reined 10 yards from where she stood. Kai Nez swung down from the saddle. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face leaner, the angles sharper. The months in the high desert had weathered him. He wore new buckskins, clean and devoid of the blood that had stained him the last time she saw him. But what struck her most was what he was missing. There was no rifle in his scabbard. There were no war paints on his face. Instead, tied to his saddlebag was a stack of books. They were old, leather-bound volumes with cracked spines, tied together with a strip of rawhide. Kai walked toward her. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the space, respecting the time that had passed. "You built it," he said softly, looking past her at the schoolhouse. "Just as you said you would." "I did," Elena replied, her voice trembling slightly. "It has a roof that doesn't leak." "Most of the time." "And the town?" Kai asked. "Do they still spit when you walk by?" "Some do," Elena admitted. "But most just nod. They like that their children can count money better than they can. It buys me a certain amount of peace." Kai smiled, and the expression broke through the stoic mask he wore, revealing the man beneath. "You have turned their greed into a tool. You are more Navajo than you know." "Why did you come back, Kai?" Elena asked. The question hung in the air, heavy with hope and fear. "You said you belonged in the desert." Kai reached back and untied the stack of books from his saddle. He held them out to her. "I went to the mission in Santa Fe," he said. "I traded 3 good horses for these. The priest thought I was mad. He asked why a warrior needed Shakespeare in history." Elena took the books. They were heavy in her hands. She looked down at the titles. Ivanhoe, A History of the United States, the primer of mathematics. "I told him," Kai continued, his voice dropping an octave, "that a warrior fights with the weapons available to him. Once, it was the bow. Then, the rifle. Now," he gestured to the schoolhouse. "Now, it is this." He took a step closer, closing the gap between them. "My people are safe for now, Elena, but the world is changing. The Iron Horse will bring more people, more fences. If the children of the dying are to survive, they cannot just know how to track deer. They must know how to read the treaties before they sign them. They must know the laws so they can fight the men who try to steal their land." He looked deep into her eyes. "You are teaching them, but you are one woman. You need help." Elena felt a laugh bubble up in her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Are you applying for a job?" Kai Nez. I am applying for a life, Kai said simply. I want to be here. With you. I want to teach the boys how to be men who protect, not men who destroy. And I want to learn. You want to learn? Elena raised an eyebrow, clutching the books to her chest. I want to learn how to live in a world where I do not have to sleep with a knife in my hand. Kai said, and I promised you I would improve my reading. Your English is terrible, Elena teased, tears finally spilling over her lashes. You sound like a poet from a bad novel. Then you will have to teach me better, Kai said. He reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was electric, grounding her, connecting her to the earth and the sky all at once. I missed you, he whispered. Every sunrise, every sunset. I missed you too, Elena choked out. The horizon was empty without you. Before they could say more, a shout rang out from the schoolyard. Kai, it is Kai. Little Bear had come back, likely forgetting a slate, and had seen the horse. Behind him. Thomas and the other children came running. The hesitation that existed in the town did not exist here, to these children. Kai was not a political symbol or a threat. He was the man who had ridden the roof of the train. He was the man who had stopped the bad soldiers. He was a hero. They swarmed him, tugging at his buckskins, asking 100 questions at once. Did you see a bear? Did you fight the bandits? Kai, show us how to track a coyote. Kai looked down at them, startled by the reception. He looked at the white faces and the brown faces, all mixed together, all looking up at him with awe. Slowly, the warrior softened. He knelt down in the dirt, bringing himself to their eye level. I did not fight bandits, Kai told them seriously. But I saw a hawk that could fly backward. Shall I tell you about it? Yes, the children screamed in unison. Elena stood back, watching them. She watched the man who had been hunted by the cavalry now sitting in the red dirt, surrounded by the children of his former enemies. He was showing Thomas how to hold his hand to feel the wind direction. He was speaking softly to a Mexicano girl who was shy. He was home. Elena placed a hand gently on her stomach. It was early, too early to show, and she had not told a soul, but she knew. The sickness in the mornings, the subtle shift in her body, it was unmistakable. A child of two worlds, growing inside her. A child who would have her father's eyes and Kai's spirit. A child who would not have to choose between being white or Navajo, but who would simply be. She looked up toward the distant hills. Standing near the tree line, barely visible in the fading light, stood Ashki Yazi. The old medicine man was leaning on his staff. He did not approach. He simply watched the scene, the school, the couple, the children. He nodded once, a slow, solemn gesture of benediction. His prayer had been answered. The bridge had been built, and it was stronger than stone. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into the soft purple of twilight, the sounds of the evening began to rise. From the Navajo camp miles away, the faint, rhythmic beat of a drum drifted on the wind. From the bunkhouse of the Miller family on the southern pasture, the lonely, sweet sound of a harmonica began to play a folk tune. The two sounds mingled in the air, neither drowning out the other. They wove together, creating a new song, a song of the borderlands. Kai stood up, gently disengaging from the children. He walked back to Elena. The children, sensing the shift, began to drift toward their homes, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Kai stood beside her on the ridge. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. They looked out at the darkened landscape, at the glimmer of the railroad tracks far in the distance, a silver thread that connected them to the world, but no longer bound them. They will not make it easy for us, Kai said quietly. The town, the government. Tomorrow will be hard. Elena looked at the schoolhouse, standing sturdy against the darkening sky. She thought of the life growing inside her. She thought of the books in her hands and the man by her side. Let tomorrow be hard, Elena replied, her voice steady and full of a peace she had never known. But today we chose each other. And that is enough. Kai kissed the top of her head. They stood there as the stars began to emerge, one by one. Millions of them, shining down on the red earth. Indifferent to history, but kind to those who dared to love beneath them. The Wild West was still wild. It was still a place of blood and dust. But here, on this ridge, it was also a place of healing. And that, Elena knew, was the only victory that mattered. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and shadows of the old frontier, and I hope you found something in Elena and Kai's story that resonated with you. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and giving the video a like. And if you really want to help these stories reach more people, hit that hype button. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Until the next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.